Hello, I'm Tony McCormick. I'm an open source geek. In fact, I'm so much of an open source geek that my wife thinks I'm insane because I won't actually use anything that's not open source if I can get away with it. I've been in the healthcare IT industry for 30 years. I wrote my first EMR in the late 80s. And that started me on a long road down the path. I've been in open source for about 10 years since then. One of the big problems with healthcare software now is the expenditures. $15,000 to $1,000 is a typical expense for an EMR in a small practice. Loss of control is the second part of this problem. Once you have those EMRs, do you have the ability to modify the workflow and move on? And what about data storage? Is the data yours? Is it the patient's? Is it the EMR vendors? What can you do with it, and how do you get to it if you need to integrate with another system or move your system to another system for whatever the reason, whether it's monetary or otherwise? One of open source's biggest problems is getting noticed. The big vendors out there have big dollars, they have marketing money, and we don't. So we have to get out there and do that ourselves. Fortunately, there are a bunch of new resources that have picked up. Open Health News is one of them. They've even gone as far as setting up some phases of readiness for open source projects. All the projects that I'm going to talk about tonight are at phase 5 or phase 6 of this readiness model. The other thing that's good is that there are a great deal of new blogs and websites that have picked up healthcare news, and a lot of them are either focused entirely on open source projects or they are heavily interested and therefore report on them. So that's good for us. So let's put on our pith helmets and go out into the wild and see if we can find that wild beast known as the free EHR. So there are some out there. You'll be surprised, but we have to be careful. The biggest beast in the market is, of course, Vista. The VA system released to maybe against their will via FOIA, a product a long time ago, back in the 70s when it came out, and there is a nice community around that project called the Hard Hats that keep it going. Recently, a project called Osera was established, which takes Vista from being a public domain to being more like a wildlife refuge, where it has a managed operation and it's truly open source. This is going to help a lot. My favorite project, however, recently is OpenMRS. OpenMRS is a very highly qualified, very tightly designed EMR that's designed to be a purpose-built system. It's deployed worldwide and is used to create specific kinds of systems for specific needs. It's not a generalized EMR. One of the spin-offs from that same project, from the OpenEMRs people, is OpenHIE. It's very early in its project right now, but their design and their smartness there is amazing. So outside of the EMR business, Osirix is one of the best digital systems in the world. It's a PACS system. It's completely open source. They have a lot of add-on features, including mobile apps. And my favorite, because I chose to make a living at it, if I possibly can, is OpenEMR. OpenEMR is an ONC meaningful use certified open source project. It's a huge project in that we have about 100 different kinds of spin-offs. These are all versions of OpenEMR and spin-off companies that support it. We have 800 downloads a week of OpenEMR, and it's deployed worldwide. It's a very, very active, very incredible community. Along with EHRs, there's this invisible open source world out there. Behind all these EHRs and behind most proprietary software are open source tools that most people don't even realize are there. Mirth is a really notable example in the healthcare industry in that Mirth is heavily utilized for that HL7 data exchange, and it is completely open source and is one of the best tools around. Behind that are the compilers and the web servers and everything. Now, you can't have an open source discussion without somebody saying, well, what about security? Oh my God. Well, let me just say that you can't have security unless you can look at the source code. If you can't look at the source code, you don't know who's looking at your data or how they can get in it or where it came from. So, open source is a game changer in here, and I think that if you look at the cost of deploying open source and the cost of deploying proprietary systems, there are going to be tools that are amazing and heavily competitive in the open source world. All of this is brought to you by a whole bunch of geeks like me and doctors in the world who think that proprietary systems are not the future and that we ought to be looking at the total picture. And remember that open source is free like freedom, not free like beer.